Hey, welcome back. In this episode, we're going to try to hack around with Stytch, which is this new platform for user infrastructure for modern applications. Who knows what that means? It's a brand new company. They just announced a $30 million Series A. They've been in beta, I think, for a long time. I was reading through an article, I think it was on Crunchbase, about them, and I thought it might be fun to just kind of play around with their docs, read through some of their client libraries and mess around, and maybe even set up a Rails app where we are using Stytch as our sort of authentication provider. So if we head over to their docs and take a look at their example apps, they've got a few that are up. Oh, cool. This is their popular guides. Also, the people who started Stytch, I think, were from Plaid, and they did a ton of user authentication inside of Plaid, and so they felt really confident, enough so that they left and started this company. And I think a lot of the flavors of the tools, the SDKs, the docs, a lot of that definitely feels very similar to Plaid, which is kind of cool. They have a JavaScript solution, or they have a server-side solution, I think. I don't know if we actually need to use any of the SDKs or if we can just use the server. So step one is to gather information. We've got some API keys in the dashboard. I did sign up for an account just so that I had an account, but yep. So in the test environment, you have a project ID and you have some secrets, and then you have a public token for your SDK authentication. And then you have to, this is walking you through setting it up with Stytch.js. And they've got JavaScript, and they've also got React that you can use. And what I was curious about was using the client library solution. So I was sort of expecting that I could just click on another language here. I'm spoiled, obviously, with Stripe, but being able to click on another language and see the code snippet in another language would be handy for those code snippets. So there's a bunch of different guides here: setting up a new solution, replacing password reset, inviting users. And I don't want to use the front-end SDK. I want to use the direct API. Okay, cool. So maybe this is going to show me, nope, yep, still. Okay, so it lets me copy the curl request, but still no Ruby code. All right, so there's a few steps here. They're pretty small. The first one is that we are going to build a sign up or login view. Why don't we just so we're going to kick off a new Rails app. I'm going to say Rails new Stytch play-t database is equal to PostgreSQL. And as that's spinning up, we're going to build a new sign up or login view. So we need to have some UI that is going to have a form that collects the email address. Okay, and we're going to say sign in with email. Then we're going to create a route for authentication, something like example.com/authenticate. Okay, and that's where users are going to be redirected to with a token in the query string, where the token is going to be something we pass to their authentication endpoint. Okay. Step 3, add a magic link URL to the Stytch dashboard. Okay, so we need to go to the Stytch dashboard and add something. Send a magic link to login or create a Stytch user. Send either a login or create magic link to the user based on the email associated. And then step 5 is logging in the user, authenticating a token. So once the user clicks the magic link, they're going to be redirected to that login magic link URL or sign up magic link URL, and then you'll use the token from the URL to call the authenticate endpoint, log the user in, and then going live, you just switch your tokens from the project, test mode, test environment to live environment. We're just going to change out the keys, I think. All right, and there are some client libraries, so let's take a look at those. Stytch Ruby, very cool. So let's see how we can add this. So we'll just say bundle add as soon as Webpacker decides to finish here. Any day now, Webpacker, any day. Oh, wow, look at, okay, so here's the documentation with for using the client library. You pass in the environment, you pass in the project ID and the secret. Okay. So we will set up let's set up, our credentials in the Rails credentials provider, and we'll set our project ID and the secret in there. And then we can use an initializer to set up the client, I think. Well, I don't know, because, yeah, maybe we want different clients for every request. Maybe it doesn't matter. I don't know. We'll just have to play around. Gosh, Webpacker is still going. Okay. Stytch is kind of a cool name. I like it. Stytch. Stytch. It's fun. I like the colors. I like the design. Yeah, there's just like a couple little nits that I would tighten up on the dashboard, but they just launched, so that they've got a lot of ways to go here. I missed this. It looks like you can pick the language maybe from the drop down at the top. It's funny, we were just talking about this. Okay, so my language of preference is Ruby. Oh, nice. Okay, so I see all of the requests here. This is the full API docs. So, okay, so login or create user is the one that we care about. I love the style here. I mean, again, I'm pretty biased, but like the colors look great. It tells you the types that it's expecting, and it tells you which ones are required with those stars, I assume. And yeah, okay, that's all awesome. If we go back to all docs, okay, cool. So from all docs, it does have the drop down where you can pick your language preference. And now if I go back to setting up a new auth solution with the direct API, also another pattern that's really common. And then here at the bottom, we see, now it's showing the Ruby version. So this is awesome. Oh, nice. They even drop in your keys so that you can copy and paste. Love it. Love it. Very cool. Very cool. So client.magiclinks.email.login or create. And we're going to pass in the email that we collect from the form, and then we're going to pass in the login and sign up magic link URLs to which the user will be redirected after successfully receiving their email and clicking on the link, I think. And then when we log the user in, we are going to get a token from the request, and then we're going to say authenticate, and that's going to give us some response that will include the user ID. That's like the Stytch user ID. And then we can use that Stytch user ID to look up the user in our database and maybe cookie them, I think. That sounds reasonable. Okay, cool. Rails is installed. So let's get started here. So Rails G model user, and it's gonna have let's store like the Stytch user ID, and let's store, I don't know, the name of the user. And that's probably fine. I think the Stytch user ID is a string, right? Because we're going to get back this user underscore or dash test dash and then some random ID. So we're going to generate a model, and then I'm going to edit the migration for this model so that we can set the Stytch user ID to be an index, because we're going to want to like quickly look up the user when they are authenticating. We're going to want to look them up really quickly with this ID. Great. So let's open up that migration, and we'll make this null false, add index users, Stytch user ID, unique, true, rake db migrate, or Rails db create db migrate. Okay, it created the database, and then let's say Rails G controller sessions. I'm going to create a sessions controller, which is where I'll have like the login and the creation and all that jazz. And so we'll have a new view. That'll be like our login view, I think. And then, or like our create a new session view. So that will create a new controller. All right, so bundle add Stytch. That will add it to our gem file. That's step one. Okay, step one is done. Now build a sign up or login view. So let's go build that next. Okay, so we're going to open up the sessions new view. We're working on step 2 to add a login view. Okay, so we'll just say sign up or login, and we'll add a form that's going to be action is like sessions. Method is going to be post. And we just need to collect, actually, I want this authenticity token thing too. And we need an input and a label for the email. No default value, and the name is going to be email. And I think sign up or log in. I don't know, maybe that should be fine, I think. I don't know, let's go to our routes and make sure that we have resources sessions. And now we should be able to go to localhost 3000/session/new and see our form. All right, so now we have an email input. So I'm going to put in an email address, sign up or log in. All right, the create action could not be found for the sessions controller. Okay, so now we need to do the next step here. So step 3, create a route for authentication. Create a route that will act as your magic link endpoint. Users are going to be redirected there from login. Okay, so we need some sort of authenticate method. So maybe we can make a new method here called authenticate. And I don't know what we're going to do there yet, but it says create a route that's going to act as your magic link. Users are going to be redirected there from the login email. It should accept a token as a query string parameter that you'll use to authenticate. So token is equal to params token. And we'll just say like render JSON of token or something. I don't know. And then that'll at least like spit the token back. And then number 4, add magic link URLs to the Stytch dashboard. So we go to the Stytch dashboard here. Magic link URLs. And this is where we're sort of like whitelisting, I think, or adding to an allow list of which URLs you're allowed to redirect to. So we're going to create this magic link URL. And the type is going to be login or set as default. What does that do? Confirm? No, it's not example.com, it's localhost. Okay, and then create a magic link URL, same thing for sign up. I don't know what the default thing does, but maybe it's if you don't pass something, then that's the default. So usually with like OAuth flows, you can potentially go to multiple places, but they usually require that it's passed. So we'll also use this for our invite URL, and we'll set that also as default. Okay, now that is where we're going to like redirect to. So that's, I think, what we wanted for add magic link. Step 5, send a magic link to login or create a Stytch user. So this is where we actually need to like create our client and do stuff with it. So let's see. If the user was created, use the user ID returned in the response to manage the user within Stytch. Save this user ID within your user's record in your app's storage. Okay, so let's go edit our credentials and set up our Stytch project ID and secret inside of our Rails credentials. So I'm going to set the editor to Vim, say Rails credentials : edit, and then our secret is this thing. And okay. So now that we have set our project ID and secret, we can create a new instance of a client. And I think I'm just going to do this directly in the sessions controller. Yeah, so when we submit that form, it's going to send a post request to the sessions controller, which will result in calling this create action. And we want to initialize this Stripe or this Stytch client with the project ID. So rails.credential dig for the Stytch project ID. And then similarly, we're going to do the same thing with the secret, rails.application.credentials dig Stytch secret. And that should give us a client, an instance of a client. And then we want to say the response is going to be client.magiclinks.email.login or create. And the email address we want to pass is params email, because that's going to be what we're passing from the form. We can actually say .params.require to sanitize the input. That's like part of strong params. And then the magic link URL is going to be come back and hit this authenticate thing. So we can just say like authenticate URL, and we'll need to go define that in our routes. so that we can receive a GET request, the /authenticate, and that will go to sessions authenticate. All right, that seems reasonable. And then I guess, what do we do from there? I mean, what do we render back? Like, maybe we need to render back something like an email is on its way or something like that. Render text like email is on its way, or check your email or something. Check your email. I mean, that should probably be a view that's all pretty and stuff, but let's just see if this works. Step 6, logging in a user, authenticating a token. So we're going to need another client. We're going to get the token, and then we're going to call client.magiclinks.authenticate. So this is where we're going to call this business. And then because we're using the client in both the create method and the authenticate method, I'm going to extract that and make a method here. We'll make it a private method. Private def client. And the nice thing about using a variable here and this bare word is that I can like pretty easily just move this down below and then have that be the return value. And I think it should still work. So the response is going to be client.magiclinks.authenticate with that token that we just got back from the query string params. And if that worked, then we want to, I guess we want to like find or create the user with that ID that was returned. So at user equals find, or like user.find or create by Stytch user ID, and that's going to be response. I guess we should call this like Stytch token response or something like that, Stytch token, just to be a little bit more explicit about what is coming back. And we want to use user ID. Okay, and then I guess we also want to like log them in here, right? So for now, I think we can say like at, or maybe we want to put it into the session current, or like user ID maybe. User ID is equal to at user.id. So I was a little concerned about this flow, like just sticking the user's ID into the session, because the session is managed, generally it's managed with cookies. It turns out that this session, this special like session bag that Ruby uses, or that Rails uses, is an encrypted cookie that is also signed with your app secrets, like app ID. When we edited the credentials, you could see like the secret base, the secret key base. So this session is actually encrypted and signed, so you can't actually like mess with this from the client. Otherwise, people would be able to just like use an auto-incrementing ID attack and just say, oh, I don't want to be logged in. I want to be logged in as the next person who logged in after me, or the person who logged in before me, or whatever, or who created an account before me or after me, or whatever. But this should like store the user's ID in the session, and then for now, why don't we redirect to /me or something, and then we can make a new route here, get /me to sessions me, and then def me is just going to say render JSON of current user. So current user is going to be a method that we have to write in application controller, and this will be based on looking up the user that was added to the database based on their Stytch token. So we're going to say def current user. Current user is going to be based on this. So we're going to say user.findBy, and we're going to pass in session user, or we're going to say Stytch user ID is going to be session user ID. And if it finds one, great. If it doesn't find one, then there won't be anyone logged in. I guess we could say logged in. There's another method here where we can say like, if there's a current user, then the current user is logged in. It's also like helpful to have like a helper method for current user and the logged in user so that we can use these methods from the views. So hopefully this works. I don't know. There's like a lot you have to build here before you can test very much. So I probably went a little further than I needed to. But let's go back and submit the form again. And it's missing this template. Render, can I not do render text? I thought I could just say render text. Render text, test. Maybe I can just do render JSON of check your email. Okay, it says check your email. Do I actually get an email? I don't know. Okay, cool. So I did get the email. It was weird because like the title is create your My First Project. Oh, create your My First Project account. So I named the project My First Project or something. So this was confusing, was that like the name of the first email I got was create your My First Project. Like it seemed like the call to action was whack because I didn't rename my project. And then it says click the button below. It's going to expire in 7 days. So I can click continue. And that brings us, where does it bring us? Back to Rails. Okay, we got a non-null violation error, null value in Stytch user ID. So we were trying to pass Stytch token : user ID. So if I say Stytch token : user ID, I thought that was what, okay, so Stytch token. All right, so we got a 401, we got a request ID, unable to auth, magic link could not be authenticated, and we have 401. Okay, so I think we like consumed it because I clicked on it twice. So let's go through the flow one more time. But before we do, I think that authentication token might be stored as a string value. So this is not actually it's not being switched to a symbol. So let's say params or Stytch token, that's going to be the response from this client library, which right now is not symbolizing, it's not symbolizing the responses. So let's put in strings, string representation there, and then let's go back through the flow. So we're going to go to /session/new, and then we'll put in an email address. I think we need to actually put like +1 or something. Like you want to add an alias every time you're testing new emails, and you can do that with a plus and then an alias, or even adding a dot in different places inside of your inside of the email address if you have a Gmail address. Okay, we got another email. I'm going to click on the link to continue, and we are redirected back to localhost 3000/me, and we're getting null. But we got redirected, so we maybe are logged in potentially. So render JSON of current user. So then if we go, let's go look at the database. So Rails C, user.count. Okay, so there is one user, user.last. Okay, so we have this Stytch test user ID. Exit. Oh, you know what? Okay, session. Did we try using the, whoops, @user.id? So it should be, oh, you know what it is? Okay, so here we're storing the ID from the database, and then in the application controller, we were trying to look it up by the Stytch ID. So this should just be user.find session user ID, because we're not looking it up. We're storing it in the session as the ID from the database, not as the ID from Stytch, which I think I like better in case you wanted to like switch out providers or something. I don't know. All right, so now if we refresh me, hey, look at that. All right, so we are authenticated and we have a current user. Phenomenal. All right, so that is how you integrate this new Stytch auth flow. I think it's pretty cool to have like a magic link URL, but I think it's also somewhat trivial to implement this same sort of system. The nice things is we didn't have to set up an email service provider, which if it was only for authentication, like if you only need email for authentication, then this is amazing. This is great. The other benefit is that they are handling the like formatting and everything of the email. That's also a pain to deal with. They have like a pretty legit setup for API keys, so that seems pretty easy to deal with. I do think that it would be amazing if they built some of this into something like, into a tool like Devise, where they give you just like, here's my Stytch Rails engine, and you just have to mount it at a certain path, and then it will automatically set up the authenticate route for you, and it will automatically set up like the current user and a bunch of helpful things for you automatically out of the box, to make it easy to work with for Rails. Probably can do the same thing for Laravel, Django, a bunch of other frameworks. So, but yeah, as a first look, I think this is pretty promising and pretty fun to play with. So that is the Stytch user authentication system. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.